Good evening, good late evening to everyone. Thanks for coming to the Merkaz Seattle presentation of Rabbi Sam's teachings of, are you calling it No Chametz for You? Is that the title of the shiur?
Oh, I don't know. Sure.
Okay.
We'll go with that.
So Rabbi Sam Reinstein is an esteemed rabbi and a friend of mine from Brooklyn. He's a rabbi at Congregation Kol Israel. He's also a very funny person who writes a lot on Facebook about fake halachot. I'm sure he could talk about that. It's very funny stuff. But he wrote the Haggadah About Nothing, which he's here to talk a little bit about. And so with that, I will turn it over to Rabbi Sam.
Sure. So first of all, thank you to Merkaz Seattle for bringing me on. It's been really fun to do these. I haven't done so many, but I've been trying to make them different each time. Thankfully, there's a lot of material to do. So it's just been really fun to do this. So feel free to participate. Feel free to join. Especially thank you to Daniel for bringing this, making this happen. It's nice to reconnect with you. We miss you here. But I'm sure you're having a great time in Seattle and everything's great there. But best to Yafa and Orly and everyone. So in terms of the Haggadah, so I figured the way I would start is I would I'm in Jerry's apartment in case that's not obvious right now. The way this Haggadah came to be is I would talk about that a bit, what it is, and then what I thought I would do. If anyone has any questions, and we can do some then. But then what I wanted to do is essentially teach a couple of the Divrei Torah that are in this Haggadah, because it is a real Haggadah. One of the hardest things about this actually has been marketing it in the sense that there's lots of parody Haggadahs that are called Haggadahs that are really fun and nothing to knock them. It's just a different thing than this. And so I've gotten from a whole bunch of people buying it, thinking like, oh, I thought it was a joke. And then, oh my gosh, it's like a real Haggadah. So what I wanted to do is kind of teach a couple of the pieces that I have in this. They're not even necessarily my favorite ones. I thought these are just like kind of the best ones for this type of format because like they're uniquely qualified, to show something. The fact that I can show video makes this a little bit different than just reading it. The way this came to be is essentially a couple facets. It's an idea I've had in my head for a really long time. I love Pesach and I love Seinfeld since at least college. And there's just two great Jewish kind of cornerstones. One is our traditional cornerstone that we don't just read it on Pesach, right? It's in Shema every night and morning. It's in Kiddush. We talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, about leaving Egypt all the time. And Seinfeld, I feel like on some level is kind of like a modern kind of version of that. I feel like if you go up to a Jewish person, at least in America, I'll at least say, and talk about like what's something Jewish that's come out in the last 50 years. This is on the top of the list, if not the top. And I think if you ask somebody like what's like the most iconic Jewish story, the Exodus story is it. And so they fit. I also think they fit thematically, which is what I'm not gonna explain that yet. I'll give a little foreshadowing, I guess. But I do believe like on some levels, Seinfeld and the Haggadah are actually saying the same thing, albeit from vastly different directions in vastly different ways. But I do think on some level, they're kind of saying the same basic principled message. So what I thought I'd do first is basically share what it looks like. So what this is one page from the Haggadah, one two-sided page. So as you see on the right, it looks basically like any other Haggadah you basically would see, right? Like it's Hebrew and it's English, but there's obviously some major differences. And the major differences are, I tried to make it as Seinfeldian as possible without making it non-traditional. So the pictures are all like Seinfeld and Torah kind of combined pictures, or Seinfeld and Haggadah combined pictures. So because the commentary on the bottom is about juju fruits, so these would be Jewy fruits. In the the commentary itself is combining like kind of something from the Haggadah and something from Seinfeld. So in this example, it's talking about, there's an episode in the opposite when Elaine finds out her boyfriend is going to the hospital, and she's at the place to buy stuff. She's right there at the movie theater, and she goes and buys juji fruits on her way to go to the doctor, and he gets all upset, like, how could you stop and get food when your boyfriend's in the hospital? So I compared that to, or contrasted it to, when the Jewish people are leaving Egypt, they stop and take all this money. They stop and take all this wealth. Like, what are they doing, right? They're leaving Egypt. Why they stop? I'll leave that for you to think about. But like, it's that type of question. It's those type of things. Like, how are they similar? How are they different? Those are the types of questions. And in the translation, and here you don't see anything in the instructions, but I tried to put as many references as possible. And overall, I reference 131 of the episodes. And there's only, depending on how you count, 169 or 180. So largely, the whole show is here in some shape or form. And obviously some episodes I quote a whole bunch. Some episodes are quoted once or twice. So yeah, this is what that Haggadah looks like. I probably will come back to this actually because one of the Divrei Torah we might get to, hopefully we'll get to, is the Vihi Shamda kind of question of what's going on there. I imagined that Newman would be would be a stand-in for all the people that have stood up against us throughout the generations. At least we rationally hate these people, or not hate them, but irrationally are upset at them, even if Jerry's not rationally necessarily upset at Newman all the time. So what I thought, first, I guess I would open it up to if anyone has any questions about like the Haggadah, about what's going on there. And then if not, or after we answer those, I'm happy to kind of go straight into doing some of the commentary. But you might have to unmute yourself if you're muted. Yeah.
I have a Seinfeld question.
Sure.
What do you mean there's two different ways of counting the amount of episodes?
I'm curious about that. Well, actually three. I know this sounds complicated. They had a bunch of episodes that were like double episodes. So like when Jerry goes down to a Del Boca Vista to visit his parents. So it's like the trip part 1 and the trip part 2. So it depends if you count those as 2 20-minute episodes or 1 40-minute episode. Also, there's 2 clip shows. So at 100 episodes and 150 episodes, they had like a 40-minute episodes that was just clips of the previous ones. And those happened on a weekly basis, meaning like those were like a week of the show. So it depends if you count. So there were 180 weeks of shows, but maybe, depends how you count. If you count part 1 and part 2 together, and if you count the clip shows as episodes and stuff like that. But I like to say there's 180 just for the Jewish aspect. But I don't think they do that on purpose.
There's like a machloket, you're saying. So even within Seinfeld, interesting. Very
exactly.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I'll go straight into it. I don't know if any of you have thought about what Seinfeld's about, at least before you saw this. On its face, it might just be a funny show. And it's usually dubbed the show about nothing, which is why the Haggadah is called the Haggadah About Nothing. But like, and that's possible that the show is literally just about nothing. The reason it's called that, it's in one episode, they pitch, it gets very meta at the beginning of the 4th season. They pitch the show Seinfeld to NBC. Obviously it gets picked up for a pilot. It doesn't get picked up for the show initially, but in real life, it obviously got picked up because we're talking about it. But like they kind of talk about like what the show is in like kind of a very like meta way. And George describes it to the NBC people as the show about nothing. That nothing happens. There's no plot. There's no growth. There's no character development. And largely he's right. There is no character development. Notably, like explicitly, they scratched some episodes literally because there was supposed to be character development. And Larry David's like, no, who's the co-writer. He's like the co-creator. He was like, no, there can't be any character development. That's not the point of this. At the same time, I think the show might actually be about something. And I have some proof for that. And I have proof for it, basically how it ends. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show a clip about, it's the last 30 seconds of the show. And when I mean it's the last 30 seconds of the show, I mean, this is it. This is the ending of the show. So when this like scene ends, there's like a post-credit scene that's like kind of joking, but like, that's it. That's how the show ends. There's no explanation. There's no furthering of it. This is the end of the plot. So I'm just going to open that. 1 second.
We'll be out in a year.
Here,
And then we'll be back.
I don't need to show all this whole thing. 1 second. Okay. Now, share screen, share audio. Okay. There we go. Okay. So this is again the last, 45 seconds of the entire show.
Uh-oh. I got it. It's out. Like that, huh? Oh, boy, what a relief.
See, now, to me, that button is in the worst possible spot.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The second button is the key button. It literally makes or breaks the shirt. Look at it. It's too high. It's in no man's land.
Haven't we had this conversation before?
You think?
I think we have.
Yeah, maybe we have.
That's literally how the show ends. The show ends, they're talking about his button on his shirt, and they're like, haven't we had this conversation before? And that's it. It's the most random thing you could possibly think of, I imagine. Largely it's irrelevant, and largely it's completely random. That is until you watch something else. So what I'm going to show you is the first scene of Seinfeld. And when I mean the first scene, I mean literally this is how the show starts. Like, this is the first thing anyone saw, the beginning of the pilot.
See, now, to me, that button's
Oh,
in
wait.
the worst possible spot. The second
Here, 1 second. I want
literally
to.
makes or breaks the shirt. Look at it. It's too high.
Okay, 1 second. Kind of ruined that.
See, now, to me, that button's in the worst possible spot. The second button literally makes or breaks the shirt. Look at it. It's too high. It's in no man's land. You look like you live with your mother.
Are you through?
You do, of course, try on when you buy.
Yes, it was purple. I liked it. I don't actually recall considering the button.
Oh, you don't recall.
How come you're not doing the second show tomorrow?
Well, there's this woman might be coming in.
Wait a second. What coming in? What woman is coming in?
I told you about Laura, the girl I met in Michigan.
No, you didn't.
I thought I told.
That's how the show starts. The show starts them talking literally the same conversation, right? They're having the same exact conversation 9 years later. The beginning of the show starts with them talking about something irrelevant, and the end of the show starts with them talking that the same conversation, exactly the exact same conversation, like literally word to word. That's completely irrelevant. And I think largely what the show's saying is that these characters, it's proving these show characters have not changed at all, right? 9 years later, they're having the exact same conversation with no meaning behind it. They're having literally the exact same meaningless, purposeless, completely irrelevant conversation. And if you think about what's happening is they spend 9 years. You would expect them to be like, not like completely different people necessarily, but you would expect them to be better. You would expect them to be like, I don't know, you watch other shows, characters develop, they change, they become better. The show that is recent that comes to mind is Schitt's Creek, where they become like radically different people by the end. But even forgetting about that, like even just, any classic sitcom, they're like somewhat different at the end than they were at the beginning. And these characters like still are awful, and they're still talking about things that are irrelevant and aren't important. And what ends up happening is that they end up in jail for it, right? They end up in jail for being bad people, essentially. All that's what happens in the finale. Everyone comes and says how bad they are, and says like they're awful, and they deserve to be in jail for it. And I think the Seder is saying the same thing. So I'm going to share again. Wanted to show a couple sources quickly, but at the beginning of Magid, in Halach Ma'anya, which is the very beginning, that like this is the bread of our destitution, I guess is the way I've translated it here. But at the end is, now we're slaves, next year we will be free, right? The whole goal is like that the Seder night changes us and will allow for a next year that we're free, right? Now we're in one place, and next year we'll be in a better place. We'll be free from whatever shackles we have. The Gemara talks about like what is the path of the Seder, right? It begins with disgrace and concludes with glory. And there's a machlok, there's an argument over what the disgrace is. Was it because they were idol worshippers, or was it because we were slaves? And we actually do both. If at the beginning of the of Magid, we start with Avadim Ayinu, and it's we were slaves, and then later when we do the whole first person psukim stuff, we start with Mitkila Ovdei Avodah Zarahim, that beginning our forefathers were idol worshippers, so we do both. But regardless, like there's a journey that happens. We were idol worshippers, and now we're not. We were slaves, and now we're free, right? Like there's a journey that's supposed to happen at the Seder. And Rosh Soloveitchik says this explicitly, that the purpose of the Exodus, and thereby its remembrance, is that it's supposed to teach ethical sensitivity, what it truly means to be a Jew. It sought to transform the Jew into a Rachaman, one possessing a heightened form of ethical sensitivity and responsiveness. So both of that, like the whole goal of the Seder is for us to change, for us to be one person when we start, and be an actively different person when we leave. Like, I think that might be why we do so many weird things at the Seder. It's not just for us to question, but it's for us to question like our lives, right? It's for us to be different people. It's impossible to be a different person if you kind of never leave your surroundings, if you never kind of challenge your own thinking. And so it's radically important to kind of be different. And so I think the shows are saying the same thing, but like from the opposite place. Seinfeld is saying that if you don't change, if you don't become a better person, if you stay the way you are always, then you'll end up in jail. And the Seder saying, in order to be free, you need to change who you are. You need to become a better person, right? They're saying the same thing, just from the opposite angle. And largely, I think that's why I felt like this made so much sense, because I think largely the two things are saying the same thing. That it's radically important to think about who you are, who you want to be, how you want to relate to your Judaism, how you want to relate to God. And otherwise, you don't move forward, you don't change, and you end up in jail. You end up as a slave. In order to be free, you need to constantly be, or at least frequently, be reevaluating your life and changing for the better. Any thoughts on that? Any comments? Any questions? It's okay if not. Okay. So I'll do. So if not, I'll do one more. There's a question that I've always had that I never really had a good answer to. Actually, I wonder what you guys think. Why do we dip on Pesach? Like, it's one of the Manishtana. We answer Avadim Ayinu, but that doesn't answer the question. Why it might answer the overall question, why is today different? But why do we dip? Like, what's the purpose of that at all?
Do you want to give an answer?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Avi. So good to have you here tonight, Sam.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so a couple of beautiful things that I've heard about the dipping is that it's connected both to the dipping of the brothers of the Yosef's
Okay, maybe.
multicolored
Right.
jacket.
Yeah.
And then the tikkun is then later the dipping of the hyssop in the blood of the lamb that then we would then put on our doorposts. And so that it's sort of like that's where and that connects to the story, because that's one of the places you could say the story begins, is when the brothers really start fighting.
Oh, definitely. I think that might explain why we dip specifically like the maror. It's like kind of coming back. It's interesting. I saw that a bunch. I don't think it's the answer people usually give though. Like that's definitely not, that's an answer I've learned more recently, but it's not the answer I learned growing up. Like, I don't know, when I was a kid, like, that's not what my dad said.
Right.
Right. Which makes sense. I mean, granted, I only have a sister, but but I think everyone always learns it's because it's something free people do, right? Like, it's just like reclining is for free people, just like drinking wine is for free people, just like everything we do at the Seder is what free people do. I think that's generally the answer given, right? Like it might have deeper symbolism, and I think there's actually I saw an article by Rav Sobolewski from YU that went deep into that Yosef connection, and that might be like a deeper reason. But I think the like plain is that it's something free people do. But I don't know. The question that I had more recently is why is that something free people do? Right. And I'm not even sure that's even true, but let's say it is. Like, why do like, I don't know, I have fancy things. There usually is stuff for dipping, but like, why? I've like never really thought about that in terms of like, what is it about dipping that makes you feel free? Like reclining makes sense. Like you don't need to care how you present yourself. Drinking wine makes sense because it's fancy. Those things are clearly fancy things. But why is dipping fancy thing? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Could it be like a sign of abundance that you have, you don't just have the matzah, but you also have the dip that goes with the matzah kind of thing?
Oh, interesting. So like it's like an extra thing that isn't necessary.
Yeah, like a garnish, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, so it's fancy to have like when you're like let's say dipping vegetables in ranch dressing or whatever, or Thousand Island dressing, right? So you could just eat vegetables, but it's kind of fancy to like have something extra. Interesting. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on it before if you know your Seinfeld, you know the connection here, but
Oof.
Or if you've read it. Okay, so I know this is one of the times I did this, and it's kind of a cool example because I like it. Usually you would think like the Torah answered something in Seinfeld, like brought meaning to the Seinfeld. This is one time where it went the opposite way, where like literally I watched an episode of Seinfeld and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's why we do something in the Seder. Like that happened like 3 times. This was the first time it happens. And you'll see, maybe you can kind of figure out what I'm talking about. So I'm going to show, it's a 1-minute clip. I'm just going to show this. 1 second. Okay, share screen.
What are you doing? What? Did you just double dip that chip?
Excuse me?
You double dipped the chip.
Double dipped? What are you talking about?
You dipped the chip, you took a bite, and you dipped again. So? That's like putting your whole mouth right in the dip. Look, from now on, when you take a chip, just take one dip and end it.
Well, I'm sorry, Timmy, but I don't dip that way.
Oh, you don't, huh?
No. You dip the way you want to dip. I'll dip the way I want to dip.
Give me the chip!
Hey!
Give me the chip!
Okay, so George, right, double dips the chip. Timmy, I should have given context, but he's at a funeral and Timmy is one of the mourners. So like, just don't get into fights with people that are mourning is like a safe bet. But separate from that. So what's George doing wrong? Like, what's so bad about double dipping?
He's dipping twice.
And therefore what? Like, why can't you dip twice? I know it feels
Well,
obvious.
because you're
right?
going to give COVID to everybody that you just dipped twice for.
So, okay, so that's the answer now. But yeah, essentially, right? You're putting your germs straight in the dip and it's not nice for anyone else, right? You're taking ownership of the dip in an inappropriate way. And it's not right. Timmy wants to have, I think that's ranch. That's why I said it before. I'm not sure. It's some type of mayo-based thing. And now Timmy can't use it, right? Or he doesn't want to. I think what the issue there is that he's taking ownership of the dip too much. But I think what happens when you dip is you're kind of taking ownership of it, right? Like normally when we eat food, we take from the center and we put it onto our plate. And then we say, our plate's mine. Everything else is communal, but our plate is mine. When you dip, you're kind of saying for that moment, at least, that the communal plate is mine. Right now, while I'm dipping, like this is mine to dip in, and then later it's yours to dip in, but right now it's mine. And you kind of take ownership of it in like a more serious way. And so I wonder if like that's actually the reason why that's like a kind of more royal way to eat, because like only somebody that feels confident that they can do that would do that, right? Like if you ever notice people that feel awkward at parties, this is actually like a tell. I feel like I look back. It's like people that take from the dip and put it onto their plate and then like kind of move away instead of like being like, no, I can dip myself. Like it's kind of like something that you feel somewhat ownership over what it is. So the problem that George is he's doing that to such an extent that he's taking that opportunity away from everyone else. And at the Seder, we're supposed to dip, but the reason why we don't double dip, we just dip twice, single twice. Is because like everyone else needs to feel like a free person too, right? Like it's like you want to feel like a free person and you want to feel like a royal person, but so does the person next to you, and they can't do that if you shove your whole face into the dip. Like that's the concept. I don't know if that's the reason why that dipping is, but it felt like it actually answered the question, right? Like it was a good example of kind of going the other way, where like the entertainment was informing the Torah instead of like kind of the opposite. Any other thoughts on that before I do? I have at least two more. No? Okay. Okay, so this one's a little more complicated. So I'm going to share back this page. So I think one of the like most intense moments of the Seder is this bottom part, the Hishamda. It's at any Seder I've ever been at, it's sung. There aren't so many things that are always sung. Dayinu, Avadimayinu, and this maybe like the only three that I can think of that I've never been to a Seder that they weren't sung in some shape or form. I guess maybe some of the end stuff, right? Like, but those are actually songs. In Nirsa. But regardless, I do think it's like a categorically like a kind of paradigmatic piece of the Haggadah, because we're going through Jewish history at this point. and we kind of say something that's fairly strong, right? And it's not only one, in this case, Newman, that has stood up to destroy us, but rather in each generation, someone stands up to destroy us, but Hashem saves us from their hands, right? Like, it's a very strong negative statement, but then very strong positive statement, right? Like, it's like, oh my gosh. And it very is about like how you say it, right? Like, I could imagine this said two ways, like, in every generation, somebody comes us to destroy us, and then Hashem saves us, but like, that's one way. And the other way is, in every generation, somebody comes us to destroy us, but Hashem always saves us. It's amazing, right? Like, how you say this paragraph is so dramatically changes what it means. And what I wanted to show is two places in Seinfeld where that happens. These are the two most, I either think, appropriate ones, but also iconic ones. I had like 6 examples. I only put 3 in the Haggadah because like, misunderstanding something based on how it's said is an easy thing for it to happen. But I'll show 2. And while you're kind of thinking about it, think about, like, each person is going to say something in this next clip, but like how they say it changes what it means. So 1 second. Sorry. Just have to open everything each time. So for context, while I share, for context, Kramer gets a line in a Woody Allen movie, and they each get a chance. They each kind of try to say it. George is all crazed because he's parking cars for a living. Elaine's about to break up with his girlfriend. Everything's fine with and everything's fine with Jerry.
Okay, I'm there with Woody. You know, I'm at this bar, and it's Woody Allen. Did I mention that?
Yeah, we got it.
And I'm sitting there with Woody, and I turn to him and I go, boy, these pretzels are making me thirsty.
Is that how you're gonna say it?
No, I'm working on it.
Do it like this. These pretzels are making me thirsty.
Oh, these pretzels are making me thirsty. No, see, that's no good. See, you don't know how to act.
These pretzels are making me thirsty. Oh, that was no good?
I didn't say anything.
All right, I'm gonna go break up with Owen.
What was wrong with that? I have a different interpretation. Do you know anything about this pretzel guy? Maybe he's been in the bar a really long time and he's really depressed because he has no job and no woman and he's parking cars for a living. All right, shut up! Shut up! I hear you! I'm coming down! These pretzels are making me thirsty! Yeah!
In that scene, everyone says the line, "These pretzels are making me thirsty." That line has been ingrained in this house so much that I was at the zoo once with my 4-year-old son, and the porcupine was eating a hot pretzel, which was hilarious on its own, because, like, why did they feed a hot pretzel to a porcupine? Didn't have a chance to ask it, but literally my son saw that and is like, does the porcupine need water? Is it thirsty? Because like, it's been like ingrained. But like, they're each saying that line, but if you notice, they're saying it like dramatically different, right? Like, depending on what's going on in their life, like from the meaning of that sentence means something radically different. Like for George, it's like he's just exasperated and just tired and just done. Meanwhile, for Jerry, he's like fairly happy. I could use some water. These pretzels are making me thirsty. But meanwhile, for Elaine, she's just like kind of like upset, but not really, and that's why like these pretzels are making me like it's like not. It's kind of annoying, but not so annoying because she's breaking up with somebody she doesn't like so much. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's very clear that how they say it radically changes what that sentence means and how you would react to it. So another example. Or any thoughts on that, or before I go on to another one?
How would you say it?
Right. So I think it would depend, right? Right. It would depend on what, like, it's interesting because I think George is right that like it depends on what's going on in that person's mind, right? Like Kramer doesn't give any context of who his character is supposed to be. And it's hard, right? Like, but I imagine in the show, like he only has one line. So like, it's probably just like pretty matter of fact. It's confusing why that line would even be in a movie. I don't know. It's a Woody Allen movie, so who knows? Yeah, so another time, and this is more like on the nose, a little less iconic. So Jerry is invited, or sorry, Tim Watley, who's a side character who actually converts on the show. They don't show it, but he converts. To Judaism. He always has this party, and Jerry's unsure if he's invited because Tim Watley asked Jerry for Elaine's number and then uses that number to invite Elaine. And he's like, wait, you used me to invite somebody else. Does that mean I'm invited or does it not mean that I'm invited? So he's all concerned. So Elaine does some digging to try and figure out if Jerry is in fact invited or not. So I'm going to show that clip.
So, Jerome, I did a little snooping around for you.
Oh, what'd you find out, Lois?
Well, I talked to Tim Watley.
Yeah?
And I asked him, should Jerry bring anything?
Subtle.
And he said, why would Jerry bring anything?
All right, but let me ask you this question.
What?
Which word did he emphasize? Did he say, why would Jerry bring anything? Or, why would Jerry bring anything? Did he emphasize Jerry or bring?
I think he emphasized would.
So depending on what's emphasized, right, really changes the whole meaning, right? Like if he emphasized why would Jerry bring anything, like that means Jerry's not invited. And why would Jerry bring anything? Like, of course he's invited, but why would he bring anything? You know, like how you emphasize something really can matter. And I think it does change like kind of it should be something on our minds. Like I feel like a lot of misunderstandings happen for this exact reason, where we like emphasize the wrong part of a sentence for like no reason really in particular. And it's like read into. And I think that's like a fairly good example. But what does this have to do with Vihishamda? So the reason this has to do with Vihishamda is because from what I see, there are two major tunes for Vihishamda. The first tune is like kind of the old time traditional tune. It's the one I grew up with. It's like the Vihishamda, Vihishamda, lavote, like that tune. I imagine people have heard that because it's kind of like the classic tune. There's a very different tune that you've probably heard as well. Yaakov Shweki's Vihishamda is kind of like a classic Jewish song at this point. It came out like 10 years ago, 2008, but it's kind of like a classic and it's a song people sing. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to play a clip. It's from a Pesach medley by Micha Gamerman. He has these Pesach holiday medleys on YouTube that are great because they also have like animation for it. And I want you to just, it's going to go from one song to the other. I want you to just think about what's the high point of the song. So it's going to do one, I'll pause it, and then it's going to do the other. And I just think about like what part of Vihishamda is the high point. So I'm going to share that right now. And again, so like that's the whole question. Like where's the high point of the song? Is it like at what point in the song? Okay. I don't want to give it away too much.
שעמדה והיא שעמדה לאבותינו ולנו והיא שעמדה והיא שעמדה לאבותינו ולנו שלא אחד בלבד עמד עלינו לכלותנו שלא אחד בלבד עמד עלינו לכלותנו אלא שבך ודור עומדים עלינו לכלותנו אלא שבכל דור ודור עומדים עלינו לכלותנו
והקדוש ברוך הוא מצילנו מידם והקדוש ברוך הוא מצילנו מידם.
That was the first song. That was the like kind of old time traditional tune. Just you can think about what was the high point of that song. Now it's going to switch to the other one.
והקדוש ברוך הוא מצילנו מצילנו מידם והקדוש ברוך הוא מצילנו מצילנו מידם.
All right. Any thoughts on the two tunes? I'll share the. I probably should have done this instead, but I'll share the actual text for you. But any thoughts on the two tunes? What were the high points?
I may be off here, but was it like the last two words, Matzilenu miyadam?
So right. So for the second one, right, the second tune, very clearly, V'Hakadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu miyadam, that the Holy One, blessed be He, rescues us from their hands. That's the high point of that song. That's where it gets too high that like regular people shouldn't try to sing that, at least when they're being chazan for shul. Like that's a classic. People trying to do on Pesach and they never hit that note. But like
flying too close to the sun, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Right. In the Yaakov, and that's the Yaakov Shweki one. That's the modern one. Very clearly, that's the high point. Anyone notice where the high point was in the first one? It's hard because it went song to song. So I'll do it if you try and think about it. So it's Ella shebechol dor vador omdim aleinu lechalotenu. Right, that's the high point of that song. It doesn't get so high, but that's like the crescendo of that song, where in every generation somebody stands us, or they stand up against us to destroy us. Right, like that's the high point. So it's a radically different song, right? In the Shweki song, the main point of this is not that we're always being persecuted. It's that God always saves us. Amazing. Like we're always persecuted, but God always saves us. And that then fits in with the paragraph above, blessed be He who keeps His promise to Israel, right? Like you're keeping your promise because in every generation, somebody stands up to destroy us, but you save us every time. In the old time tune, it's kind of like the opposite. It's like you promised us, but oh my gosh, every time somebody comes us to, like they come up against us to destroy us, and yes, you save us, but like, can that stop, please? Like that, right? Like radically different kind of stories being told depending on the tune. And the reason why that's significant is I think it transforms like this whole part of the Seder. Is the Seder at this point about like God continuing to save us, or is it about us still being enslaved? And I think the time when these songs came out is important, right? We don't know when the traditional tunes started, or at least I don't. If anyone knows that, that'd be cool. But clearly a long time ago. But in a modern day, right, since 2008, right, like there's still anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism might even be growing right now. But largely, certainly if you compare it to Jewish history, things are great, right? We have a Jewish state. We feel comfortable living in Seattle or New York or wherever. Like we feel very comfortable living in these places, publicly Jewish. Like there's kind of no, like relatively things are amazing, especially if you compare them to like vast parts of Jewish history. It's like one of like the golden points to be Jewish, probably. And so it makes sense that somebody living now would think like, in every generation, God saves us, right? That would make sense. But for somebody living in like persecuted in Poland with pogroms, I could imagine the focus not being that, right? The focus is not like that God always saves us. It's like, oh my gosh, every generation, like these people persecuted my parents, they're persecuting me. I'm sure they'll persecute my kids, right? Like it feels never ending, with the understanding that God's going to eventually keep his promise and saves us, but still like with a more solemn kind of understanding. And why we in our table, because of this, actually sing both songs, mostly also because one's traditional, so we do it, and the other one is just like a good song, so it's worth singing. But I think symbolically, it's important to have both of those kind of views of Jewish history simultaneously, that like things are great now, overall, but like understanding that in every generation, like it's not always so easy, and we should be mindful of that and understand that that's the case and will be the case. But we've also been saved every time, and there's an understanding that like we can also celebrate the fact that things are good and the fact that we have a state, and like we can celebrate all these positive developments also, because we have this belief that God saves us every time. And we shouldn't like lean too far to either one. We shouldn't lean too far to that there's always a Newman, and we all shouldn't also lean too far that God always saves us, that everything will definitely be okay. Both of them are true. And I think a good example of that is kind of what happens in the Megillah, where when Mordecai tells Esther to go and to save the Jewish people, he's like, don't worry, it will be saved. It'll come, if you don't do it, it'll come from another place, right? God will save us no matter what, but like, you better go and do it, because like, we're always persecuted, like take care of this right now, right? Like those two things are true simultaneously, even if we lean heavily more to one, depending on the time. Do I have time for one more?
I think if people are interested, I'm open to it. Sure.
Okay. So this one might feel a little controversial. So I apologize in advance, but it's my favorite. It's one of my favorites. And I've gotten really good reactions from it so far. Here, I want to go to the right page. I want to share the right page for you. 1 second. Okay. This is the Haggadah. 1 second. Okay. So this paragraph is towards the end of Magid. It's talking about like about all the makot that happened in Egypt. And it's talking about like, it's counting all the, like, it's all this thing about counting where there are 100 or 400 or 10 or 500, right? Like all the numbers around. So that's what this Dvar Torah is about, but that's not what I'm talking about right now. The one thing in it is that they see Vayar Yisrael Teyad Agdolah, and Israel saw the great hand, Asher Asa Hashem b'Mitzrayim, that Hashem made in Mitzrayim, God made in Mitzrayim. Vayiram at Hashem, Vayaminu b'Hashem Moshavdo, and the people feared God and they believed in God and in Moshe as servants. So I do have one thing that's about Moshe as well, the fact that this is the only time he's mentioned. But what I wanted to focus on right now is the fact that the Jewish people see the hand of God, and then they're fearful of God and they believe in God, right? That's very clear. They see the great hand, they fear God, and they believe in God. And I was thinking about like what's going on there, right? Like it is a jump, right? It's not an unclear jump that they see like God's hands and then believe in God. Because I could have thought something that only happens, right? This happens now, and not at, let's say, Har Sinai, when they kind of feel the presence of God, right? They don't do that yet. They do that. I mean, the Midrash imagines that they did that in when they go through the Yam Suf, but not in the text, right? They feel God, they see God's presence later, but not now. Like, why, when they see the hand of God, do they then believe in God existing? because it's not exactly clear. We don't get an explanation as to what's going on. So before reading this Torah, you definitely don't know where I'm going with this one. But I actually believe there's a context in which this happens to us when we watch Seinfeld. And like something that's happening to the Jewish people when they believe in God, even though they only see his hand, happens to us. So I'll show you a clip, and then I'll explain to you what I mean. So what this clip is it's a series of clips. So it's not just one. It's not just one episode. It's about 1.5 minutes, showing not every single time, but just about every single time a certain character comes up in Seinfeld.
My friend Bob Sacamano, he came in here for a hernia operation. Oh yeah, routine surgery. Now he's sitting around in a chair by a window going, "My name is Bob."
She's got rabies, just like my friend Bob Sacamano.
Look at that, she's delirious. She's foaming at the mouth.
Well, Bob Sacamano, he stayed with me once for 1.5 years.
You know my friend Bob Sacamano?
I thought he was Kramer's friend.
Well, he called last night about 3 a.m. and we got to talking. He sells Russian hats down at Battery Park. $40.
Hey, Jer, are you going to this Bob Sacamano party?
Am I going? It was 3 nights ago.
Hey, you know Elaine, she stopped by. Yeah, dropped off that Bob Sacamano hat.
Yeah, oh, she's upset with him. Yes, sirree. Yeah, well, thanks for stopping by.
Would you please just get on with the stupid Bob Sacamano story?
Okay, well, I'm on the phone with Bob, and I realize right then and there that I need to return this pair of pants. So I'm off to the store.
What happened to Bob Sacamano?
Well, nothing. His part of the story is done. Well, don't worry about it. I know a guy.
Down here?
Yeah, Bob Sacamano's father. You know, my friend Bob Sacamano made a fortune off of those. See, he came up with the idea for the rubber band. Before that, people would just hit the ball and it would fly away.
Okay, so that's just about every time Bob Sacamano comes up in Seinfeld. There's 1 or 2 more times, but they're less appropriate. And thankfully that clip, I didn't make that clip. Somebody else made that clip and cut those ones out. So it's great. But that's every time essentially every time Bob Sacamano comes up in the story. And I think if you asked anyone, like, is Bob Sacamano in Seinfeld? I think everyone would say yes. Like somebody that watches the show would say, of course he is, right? But if you think about it, we never see him. Like we don't see him at any point. We don't even see like the side of his face. There is no character of Bob Sacamano in the show. We only see essentially what I would characterize as his hands, right? We see his fake hats. We see the things his dad gets. We see the invitations he sends. We see Kramer talking to him. We see Jerry talking to him, but we don't actually meet him. He's not actually a character in the show. And I imagine is that's actually somewhat similar to what's happening to the Jewish people as they're leaving Egypt. They don't actually meet God, but they see like the hand of God so many times that they're like, God's there. And I think it's the same thing that happens to us while we're watching, is that like we see Bob Sacamano come up over and over again, and we're like, Bob's there. We know Bob's there. And largely, that's kind of what religious people have to do. Religious people of all religions and all spiritualities have to do, right? We don't see God, but we can see his hands, right? We can see his hand in anything that we like are looking for it. And in the same way that we see, like, we only see Bob's hand and we believe, like, you can kind of do the same thing. And even though like the Jewish people don't actually see God, they can believe in God regardless, because they see his hand. So I don't know. It's kind of another time where like I saw something in Seinfeld and I'm like, oh, that fits with the Haggadah really well. Yeah. So before I end, any other questions or thoughts on anything I talked about or about the Haggadah in general?
just in general, I wanted to say thanks, Sam. And I was thinking that, I mean, the relationship, there's a whole connection between Purim and Pesach, of course, with the Arba Parshiot and everything. But just the whole idea for your Haggadah in general, I think, is very much related to an idea in Purim that I really think is a very deep and important idea of God hiding in the world. And I mean, of course, we can access God more directly through tefillah, through Torah, through like traditional ways, but there's still like, it's a beautiful thing to be able to just look into the world and find, whether it's Torah concepts in Seinfeld or any, like we make that choice every day as to whether or not we're going to try to see those hands all around us. And so just wanted to thank you very much.
No, 100%. I actually thought about writing about that type of thing as a preface to the book, and I decided I would rather make it self-evident, if that makes sense. Like I'd rather make it like the fact that you can see real meaning in a show like this is something that like is something you just like experience instead of being told. 100%.
And I want to thank you, because I think I'm going to be thinking about this a lot over our Seder and with our kids. What you said at the beginning about the Haggadah being something that we're supposed to change, you know, from the beginning of the Seder to the end, and kind of the flaw, the Seinfeld, you know, flaw is that they didn't, and they ended up in jail, you know. And I think that idea of what makes us free and tikkun and the process is something I'm actually really excited to talk about with my teenager. I have 2 teenagers.
Yeah.
And I think they're like at the perfect age for that kind of conversation. So
great.
Thank you for giving us that.
Right. And in particular, I mean, this is in the introduction too, but Rav Kook has a beautiful idea that Nirtza is written in passive voice. Everything else is an active voice. So you're you eat the maror, you break the matzah, but Nirtza is like it was accepted, so it's in passive. And the reason he says that is because like at that point you've changed already, and that's why you can just sing silly songs. Like you can sing simple songs because you've hopefully reached that point. And that's like, so that the end of the Seder that a lot of people end up skipping or going through, actually kind of makes sense to kind of like, if you've really done a good Seder, you kind of don't need, like Nirtza is kind of a thing to kind of celebrate the fact that you're done, almost kind of like an after party of sorts, because you've changed, hopefully.
Yeah, I just want to echo. I mean, this is really interesting, and you know, for people who like me who aren't so learned, and you know, it's always hard to relate, you know, to different things and sort of have things really stick in my brain. You know, this is really, these kinds of things where I can like picture them and remember really is like incredible, because I feel like I'm actually going to remember like what Rachel said and a couple of other things that I can talk about and maybe read about. I can hold on to it. So, you know, you haven't simplified the ideas, or, you know, it's all available in the Haggadah, and we do the whole Haggadah, but you really made it accessible in a way that's really fun. And so I think it's amazing.
Great, thank you. And one of the hardest parts about this was I needed to make 2 things accessible. If that makes sense. I feel like most people that write Haggadahs need to make the Torah accessible. I also tried to make the Seinfeld accessible, which is hard because, like as I said, I quoted over 130 episodes. Most people reading this are not like so fluent in their Seinfeld. They haven't just watched all of it and then gone back to it like 10 times to like look up what they're saying. At least I imagine. So, so they like kind of that needs to be explained too. So I tried to do that as much as possible. Sometimes things were just thrown in as jokes, and you know, whoever gets it gets it. But yeah, thank you.
It's really great, very original.
I have a curveball question.
Sure.
So if you had to like cast the Seinfeld characters in the Haggadah, or speaking more broadly, like the Yetziat Mitzrayim story, like who would play what part?
Ooh, interesting. So I actually make them as the 4 sons because I think they really fit the 4 sons like really well. But it's an interesting thought. I mean, like, I feel like Jerry's clearly our own. I'm trying to think of Jerry as our own, because he's like a rule follower and he kind of does what he's told. He doesn't question stuff. He doesn't like kind of, I mean, question things, but he kind of like is very loyal and kind of he wants to follow the rules. Like that's his whole shtick. Perfect for a Kohen Gadol. Trying to think who else would be what. Because Moshe is a hard one. I actually feel like Kramer would be, I know this is gender swap, but I feel like Kramer makes sense for Miriam, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like Kramer would be the type of character that would just see the C-split and go crazy with everyone. Like, that makes sense to me as like kind of like he would like be able to revel the moment in a way that other characters wouldn't. Maybe George is Moshe, because Moshe is always like kind of like self-negating in a way. At least Moshe's doing it in a positive way. George is not doing it in a positive way. Maybe that's how I would do it. You need to think about who Elaine would be, but it's a good question.
Yeah, no problem. Does anyone else have any other questions before we let Rabbi Sam go?
And Daniel linked it, but it's available on Amazon, or there's actually a bunch. There's one in, I don't know. It's interesting. There's a bunch of places. I kind of sold it through another place that local bookshops could pick up if they wanted to. So that's great.
So I wanted to say thank you so much for doing this, and for introducing us to the world of, for those who are not familiar, for introducing us to the world of both Seinfeld and the Haggadah, and sort of tying them together so beautifully. So I'm really looking forward to checking this out, this Pesach. So yeah, thank you very much. Please, support Rabbi Sam and pick up a copy of the book. And yeah, have a great evening. And we'll be posting this recording up on the Facebook page, as well as sharing it through the Merkaz newsletter. But please, have a good evening, have a great Pesach, and stay safe, everyone. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.